Today, I want to explore the question, do kids learn faster than adults? I'm leaning towards challenging that statement. I don't think they actually necessarily do. But if they do, what makes children learn faster than adults? And my opening statement for this is essentially to just say, like, a lot of complex education is done later in life when you are an adult. For instance, when you learn harder topics like science and math and actual occupational trade skills, that's a lot later in life. But the fundamentals for what you're learning, for instance, language and music, those are two topics I'm both very much engaged in right now, and why I'm thinking about this. Those two things, I can see how there's a clear advantage to learning when you're younger. And I do believe what makes like a kid learn faster, it's primarily two things. Number one is like the headspace and time. When you're an adult, you have a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things that you're thinking about. If you work a full-time job, that's 8 hours in a day right there. And it's probably more than 8 hours too, because you have to drive to work, drive back to work, from work, make meals, buy groceries, all that stuff. It's a lot of stuff that you have to do where you don't really have the time or mental space to really learn something new. And just to also preface this, I'm thinking about this, it's been on my mind quite a lot, this topic, because I am trying to learn new things right now, and I'm thinking about how best to approach it. And that's why I want to figure out the elements to why, if they do, why kids learn faster than adults for these things with music and language. Perhaps not like the more complex topics like rocket science. But I do think, like I said, time. And another one is like stimulation. I think when you're a kid, you're a lot more easily stimulated to things like novelty, for instance. When you've never experienced something before, you have a tendency to remember that first experience very well, even if it's like happened way more afterwards. I remember the first time I've heard curse words before. I said it as a kindergartner because I heard like teachers say it in passing, and when I said it to the adults, they were like, "Oh my God, don't say that, don't say that." I'm like, "Whoa, like why not? Why is it so bad? It's just like words, right?" But that first time I said it, I also would say it in front of my cousins too, because I was like, "Wow, these words have so much power. Like I want to share it, that experience, right?" And it's like a very vivid memory, even though now like you hear it all the time as when you're older. Like all my friends say it, like literally everyone says it. I still don't for some reason. I think that first encounter of the adults telling me not to say it was so impactful to me that I still don't curse, despite being in my late 20s. So it's very weird. But yeah, it's sort of that stimulation that you get from the first experiences. And when you're learning something, like let's use music as an example because it's very relevant to me. When you're learning piano and you're learning how to read notes off of sheet music, you make these connections between this note is this on the staff, and you play it, and then you start learning that's how you play piano. But in my opinion, that's actually a very fundamentally flawed way of learning how to play piano or learning music in general, because music is very, very much an auditory experience. You're listening to the music. But if you're learning it through a visual medium where, okay, this note on the piano looks like this and it matches with this on the piece of paper, you're kind of missing the majority of what music is, which is that auditory experience. And I feel like I learned music through that method, and I definitely feel like it's not the best method, like not even close. And I don't blame my teacher whatsoever. It's more so just like the system that's been created around how you learn music, because it is probably easier to do it that way and more structured than it is to train someone by ear from the very beginning. But I do think it's probably more advantageous to learn by ear in the very beginning instead of learning sheet music. And learning sheet music later on would be better. I cannot attest that for myself anymore because I've learned all of it in terms of sight reading and ear training, but I still feel like my ear training is a lot weaker than it could be had I started off with ear training. And I still think my ear abilities for music are at a closer to a beginner level compared to my practical and sight reading abilities. So that's just something I thought about quite a bit. And I feel like the only way you can really test that is to have people out there who are piano teachers. I'm actually also a certified piano teacher, so I can do this myself. But once you get a student, you don't just go off of methods that other people use. I feel like the way I got certified, it's through a program called ABRSM, DIP ABRSM for teaching, specifically pedagogy. I had to take a test where I presented my teaching methods and styles, and the way I learned those teaching methods was by reading suggested content from them, which are books about teaching methods they recommend. So it's almost as if what they think is the best way to teach is how you should teach, because that's what they're gonna look for in the exam. You probably could present a very new method of teaching, and they're gonna judge you for it, and if they deem it too weird or unworthy or not good, they're gonna fail you. So, but that's just an exam. You're still free to teach however you want, but it's sort of like that process of having studied for that exam and gathering all this material and resources, spending so much time crafting your own teaching method based on what they tell you is the best method. You're invested in it. You want to try that method out because you technically spent all that time creating it or crafting it. So it's like a cycle of what is supposedly best, to the point where I'm sure there's a lot of music teachers out there that don't experiment with their teaching methods. And I do feel like that's an analogy. It's similar, not an analogy. That's an example of how this school system is that they've come up with these certain benchmarks that you have to reach for certain subjects, and it's always taught that way. There's not enough experimental teaching. So that's definitely. It's not a tangent, but it's not really exactly the point I'm trying to make with the whether or not kids learn faster. But I do think that it's related in the sense that if it's always taught a certain way, it's hard to tell what the variables are in terms of that subject, how to learn that subject the best way. So for music, relating it back to the original topic, if you are a kid and you're learning it in this way that is meant for ear training, ear purposes, you have a blank slate. You're able to learn that faster because you don't have to relate it to what's on the sheet music, what this note is a C on the sheet music. It's more so you internalize how it sounds, and that's your first experience with it. So that stimulation, you remember it. So it's much easier for you to, for instance, get perfect pitch when you're a kid. It's apparently impossible to get as an adult. So that sort of relates back to the topic and why I rambled so much on different methods of teaching. So I do think it's very important to get a correct first exposure to what you're learning, and not fill your brain with a lot of information and stimulation from other things that don't necessarily help you build a strong foundation for what you're learning. And that's where kids have a huge advantage. So for me, I was very good at sight reading because that was my first experience with music. I would learn off of sheet music, and whenever I learn a new piece, it's always off of sheet music. So that continuous stimulation with sheet music allowed me to get really good with sight reading. But I think I'd rather much have the ear abilities of someone who started off when they were a kid. So in that sense, I really do think kids do learn faster. Same thing with language, for instance. When you're learning a new language from the very beginning, you don't have to relate it back to your native language, because that is your native language, the first language you're learning. So it's much easier to understand the meanings and nuances behind that language because you're getting that first initial stimulation from that. So those are two things that for sure I believe you will learn faster as a kid. But at the same time, learning as an adult, I don't think it's necessarily that much of a disadvantage. Sure, it could slow you down, but if it's sort of like knowing that about how you learn as a kid, knowing that it's the initial stimulation and relating it back to stuff you already know that's slowing you down, you could try your best to essentially try to learn that language from like, I know it's impossible because you'll always sort of have that like subconscious thought, oh, that's what this means in English, or that's what this means in my native language. But you could do your best to avoid that and sort of internalize what those words mean or what those phrases mean on its own. So tying it to meaning rather than tying it to what it is in English. And same thing with music, tying it to the sound and tying it to the feeling of what that sound generates, versus tying it back to, oh, this is a C, an A, or this is what it is in the sheet music, and visualizing it like that. So it's just, I do think that's what I've come up with in terms of how to approach learning things where it was an advantage to learn as a kid, and breaking down those factors and how understanding those factors can help with learning now. And another big thing I feel is mental space, for sure. Like I mentioned earlier, as an adult, you're very busy and you don't have that mental space to really learn as much. So generating that mental space as best as you can is another big thing. So for me, that mostly just means giving the time to learn those things. And for music, I've been getting into music production lately. I've been trying to make videos less. I know I'm not doing a great job right now since I am making more videos, but I'm trying to spend less time on them. But that's a big reason why I stopped doing YouTube on my main channel, is because I didn't have the mental space to learn the things that I called my passions, which was music and music production. So I had to generate that mental space somehow. And the way I decided to do it was to just stop making YouTube videos that took 15 plus hours to make. So there will be sacrifices if you really want to learn something new and you feel passionate about it. But if it's a hobby, just learn it whenever you feel like you have time. But also another thing is how much you intake, how much consumption of information. And I'm not saying like, oh, social media is bad, you shouldn't be watching YouTube videos or watching whatever you watch. It's more so what you're consuming. So you can spend a lot of time on YouTube, but if all of what you're watching is educational content on what you want to learn, that's a good thing. I think your brain will essentially, what I've noticed in the past for me is my brain always comes up with, or whatever I'm doing at the moment, or I consider my priority, my brain sort of processes information on its own without me needing to do anything. So whenever I'm working on YouTube stuff, ideas just come to me without me needing to sit down and brainstorm. It just happens. Same with this, like this topic. I thought about it a lot before, but when I woke up this morning, I was like, oh, I'm thinking about all these things because I know I want to talk about something today as a topic, and this just came up, and it just kept processing in my head. So there's like this thing where if it's around you, if it's what you're sort of consuming, thinking about, naturally your brain will start processing all that information on its own if you give it the mental space, and probably if you're bombarding it with other stuff at the same time, it's very difficult for your brain to do that processing. So mental space, and I feel like there's a better term for it, because mental space just entails like having the space, but it's more so just like mental prioritization, not cluttering it with too much variety. So more so like focus, I suppose, just mental focus on one or two things, and yeah, just keeping that in the forefront. And that's pretty much it in terms of the topic, but I do want to relate it back to what I've been trying to do lately, which is create music production, like music originals. So I released my first original about a month and a half ago, and it's been out on Spotify and all that stuff. I'll go ahead and link it down below if you're interested in checking it out. It's actually the background music for this video right now and the previous one. It actually feels really, really good to use your own music as background music for videos. It's just like something so satisfying about it, not having to use music taken from elsewhere that's copyright free and all that stuff. So that's great. And I did successfully distribute my second original yesterday. That was the goal that I set in the previous video, and it actually took longer than expected because you do have to create like the artwork for it and all that stuff. I kind of just took copyright-free artwork and used it for that. I will probably spend more time on the album artwork, like actually commission an artist and everything. once that comes around. But for now, I'm not too worried about the art. It's more so the visual art. It's more so the music that I care about. So that's been released. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do though. It's like DistroKid, and in the beginning you do have to like go into Apple Music, YouTube Music, all that stuff, link accounts, Instagram Music, all that stuff. It's a lot. I haven't done all of it yet. I still just released it, but it's something I'm gonna have to work through. And as for Japanese practice, I totally, it's a time thing, so I misunderstood and it's actually happening today instead of yesterday or last night. It's kind of easy to get that mixed up since the time difference from here in Japan is like pretty huge, so I'll be practicing with my friend today instead. But I still worked on stuff on my own. I'm looking into JLPT, I basically need to get to the 4th level for the JLPT before I head to Japan. That's my goal, so let's see how that goes. My practice was not that great because I went to the Huntington Library. It was sort of like a last minute thing with some friends, and I really like that place. So but you've been seeing B-roll of that place this whole time. And yeah, my friend visited from NorCal basically, so we just hung out, and yeah, that's about it. So that is what happened yesterday. For today, I'm going to work on music again. I need to do that every single day. I think the theme of this whole video series is do something daily and it'll change your life. So for me, music is something I've been wanting to get into more for the past like decade. So me finally getting into it is like actually good, like, and doing it every day. So that's another thing. And then the actual Japanese practice. So I feel like I probably don't need to continuously say that all the time, but let's be more specific with it so it doesn't sound super repetitive. So today I'm going to brainstorm the new original, so the 3rd one, and come up with a melody and come up with the harmony, so it's just the chord progressions, and hopefully with some of the structure. I got to do this as fast as I can because I want to release the album before the new year. So that's gonna be pretty difficult. 5-ish tracks before, yeah. Let's see how that goes. All right, that's about it. Let me know your thoughts about the topic. I'm really curious because these are just observations I've made from my own life and just things I feel that I like. It's very personal and anecdotal. So I would love to hear actual other people, like what their thoughts are, if you know more about the subject than I do, regarding how kids learn certain things faster than adults, or how perhaps that isn't true for other things. And that's about it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.